I pretended to take a trip, the scent of my suitcase still fresh with the scent of my departure. But I wasn't running away. I was running toward the truth. Still, as I left the house behind, my heart raced with the secret I was about to uncover. As the city faded in the rearview mirror, I found the hidden messages, the lies buried beneath the man I called my son-in-law. While the pieces came together, I realized this wasn't just about him, it was about my daughter. And now I would do anything to protect her from the truth he tried to hide. Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. Ava sat in her living room, her eyes fixed on the photograph of Emily and David on their wedding day. A frozen moment of happiness. The frames around her, a carefully curated portrait of a perfect family, felt increasingly like a lie. She'd spent years trusting David, believing he was the man who loved her daughter with the kind of devotion that would weather any storm. But now she couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that had taken root in her gut. It started small, misplaced phone calls, David's habit of glancing nervously at the clock whenever she entered the room, a strange tightness in his smile when he spoke. Then there were the late nights. The trips he claimed were business-related, but with no clear destination. Ava couldn't ignore the growing whispers in her mind any longer. Something wasn't right. The tipping point came one evening when David had returned from another business trip. He'd walked into the house, a little too late, a little too rushed. His jacket was slightly wrinkled, his shirt unbuttoned in an odd way, as if he'd been in a hurry to strip it off. Ava noticed the faint smell of a perfume she didn't recognize. David was too good at hiding his secrets, or so he thought. But Ava knew. Her heart raced, a quiet storm brewing inside her. She couldn't confront him. Not yet. Not without proof. Ava made a decision. She pretended to take a short trip of her own the next morning. A weekend in Louisville, just a couple of hours away. She packed her bag quickly, pretending to act casual, but the fluttering in her chest told a different story. She wasn't going for the getaway. She was going to investigate. Her mind was sharp, and her instincts were sharper. As soon as she arrived at the hotel she'd booked under a fake name, she turned her phone off and put her plans into motion. The first thing she did when she returned home was slip into David's office while he was in the shower. His jacket hung over the back of his chair, and there it was, a small piece of evidence tucked into an inside pocket. A hotel receipt. Ava's fingers trembled as she unfolded it, reading the name of the hotel, the dates, and the amount charged. Her heart sank as she recognized neither the hotel nor the location. This wasn't a business trip. She didn't know exactly what it was, but she could feel the dark weight of betrayal hanging in the air. Without a word to anyone, Ava made her next move. She waited until the next day, until she could see him leave the house. It was a pattern. David always left at exactly 3 p.m. She wasn't sure where he went, but today, she would follow him. Ava slipped into her car, the engine humming quietly as she tailed him from a safe distance, careful not to be seen. The drive took longer than she expected, through narrow, winding roads lined with oak trees, past the rolling fields of Lexington, until they reached a small hotel on the outskirts of town, the same one from the receipt. She parked her car behind a row of trees, her pulse pounding as she watched David enter the hotel. His steps were quick and purposeful, as if he was trying not to be seen, but Ava had already spotted him. She felt a surge of anger, confusion, and fear, everything colliding within her. But it was what happened next that shattered any remaining illusion of doubt. A woman, young, blonde, and dressed in an elegant coat, walked toward David just as he exited the lobby. Ava's breath caught in her throat. She saw the way David's face lit up when he saw her, the way he reached out for her hand with a tenderness that was foreign to the man she had known. The woman leaned in, her lips brushing David's cheek in a kiss that spoke volumes. Ava's stomach twisted as the two of them walked hand in hand toward a nearby room, disappearing behind the hotel doors. Her breath came in shallow bursts. She couldn't believe what she had seen. There was no denying it anymore. David, the man she had once welcomed into her family, was living a double life. The woman was no mere acquaintance. There was something much deeper, much more intimate between them. Ava sat frozen in her car, the weight of the truth settling over her like a heavy blanket. She felt the tears welling up in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Not yet. She needed to be strong. She needed answers. In a daze, she grabbed her phone, her fingers shaking as she dialed Rachel's number. The line rang for what felt like an eternity before her best friend's familiar voice broke through the silence. "Rachel, it's Ava," she said, her voice tight with barely controlled emotion. "I need you to listen to me. I've just seen something that I can't ignore. I've been following David. He's meeting someone, a woman. And I know this isn't just an affair. It's much worse. I need your help. Please." Her words hung in the air like a desperate plea for someone to understand. She didn't know what to do next, but Rachel's calming voice on the other end was the anchor she needed. "Don't worry, Ava, you've got this," Rachel reassured her. "I'll help you through this. Whatever it takes, we'll figure it out. Just stay strong." But Ava wasn't sure how much strength she had left. All she knew was that her world had just cracked open, and there was no turning back. The morning light filtered through the blinds, casting thin shadows across the floor of Ava's living room. She hadn't slept, hadn't been able to. The events of the night before, the images of David with that woman, kept replaying in her mind. But they weren't the only thing that weighed on her. The receipt, the hidden hotel stay, the lies she had uncovered. It wasn't just a betrayal of love. It was something darker, more dangerous. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, the cool touch of the keys grounding her as she entered David's personal password into her computer. She didn't know why she knew it, but it was one of the many things she had picked up over the years. A quiet fact she'd stored away, a sliver of insight into his life. David had never been particularly careful. The file she opened was a mess of numbers and transactions, too much to make sense of at first glance. But Ava had been a teacher, a woman who loved puzzles, and she knew how to read between the lines. It didn't take long before her eyes fell on something she couldn't ignore, a string of transactions, all made under Emily's name. Ava's heart lurched as she leaned in closer to the screen, scanning the records. There they were. Several large sums, each more than they could afford, funneled into accounts that were never mentioned, that never appeared in their household finances. Ava's fingers trembled as she clicked on the next link. More transfers, each one more damning than the last. Emily's inheritance, the money she had inherited from her late grandfather, the small fortune Ava had always believed to be safe, was slipping through their fingers. David had been siphoning it off for months. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just financial irresponsibility, this was theft. This was a man who had been slowly and deliberately stealing from his wife, his own family, while keeping her in the dark. But that wasn't all. As Ava dove deeper into the web of transactions, she began to see patterns. Money moving in and out of various untraceable accounts, international transfers, offshore holdings. Her blood ran cold. The kind of activity she was seeing wasn't just the result of a greedy husband. It was the signature of something much darker, something criminal. Ava's mind spun, but she focused. She traced the transactions, the shell companies, the fake invoices. She wasn't just looking at financial theft. She was looking at money laundering. David had been involved in a network of criminal activities, and Emily's inheritance was the vehicle he'd been using to fund it all. Tears welled in Ava's eyes, but she fought them back. She couldn't break down now, not when she was so close to the truth. Ava slammed the laptop shut and stood, pacing the room. Her thoughts were a blur, but one truth stood clear above all the rest. David wasn't just trying to steal from Emily. He was preparing to disappear, taking the inheritance with him, washing the money clean, and disappearing into the shadows. Her stomach churned at the thought. David had been planning this for months, perhaps longer. And she had just uncovered the first piece of the puzzle. Ava knew what she had to do next. She had to tell Emily. But the thought of confronting her daughter, who was still so blind to the truth, filled her with dread. How could she break this to her? How could she make Emily see that the man she trusted, the man she loved, was not who he appeared to be? But Ava couldn't wait. She had to act before David was able to get away with everything. She picked up her phone, her fingers hovering over Emily's name in the contact list. She had to be careful. She couldn't just throw this at her all at once. Emily would never believe it. Not without proof, not without something more concrete than Ava's own suspicions. Taking a deep breath, Ava dialed the number, her heart hammering in her chest. The phone rang once, twice, and then Emily's voice came through the line, light and bright, as if nothing was wrong. "Hey, Mom, what's up?" Ava struggled to keep her voice steady. "Emily, I need to talk to you about something important. It's about David. Something I've discovered." There was a long pause on the other end. "Mom, what are you talking about? Is everything okay?" I I don't think so. I've been looking into something, and I found some things that don't add up." Ava's voice was low, almost fearful. "I think David's been taking money from your inheritance. A lot of it. And I think he's involved in something much bigger. Something dangerous." "Mom, stop," Emily said, her tone defensive. "This is crazy. David would never do that. He's been working hard for us. Maybe you're just overthinking things." "No, Emily," Ava said, her voice tightening with urgency. "You need to listen to me. This isn't just overthinking. I've seen the evidence. He's been hiding things from you. You need to trust me." There was silence on the other end of the line, and Ava could hear Emily's breathing growing more shallow. "I know you want to protect me, but I'm not a child anymore. I trust David. He would never do something like that to me." Ava's heart dropped. She knew Emily wasn't ready to hear this. She wasn't ready to face the man she'd married, the man who had so carefully built a life of lies. "I just want you to be safe," Ava said, her voice softening. "Please, Emily, look into it yourself. Look at the accounts, the transactions. You have to see the truth." I I don't know, Mom. I need time to think." The line went quiet, and Ava's heart sank. She had tried, but it hadn't worked. Not yet. Ava stared at the phone in her hand. She had warned her daughter, but she knew Emily wasn't ready to believe her. She was still too blind to the truth. But Ava wasn't done. She couldn't be. David had to be stopped. And she would do whatever it took to expose him, before it was too late. Her fight had just begun. Ava's eyes burned as she stared at the pile of papers in front of her. The evidence she had gathered, transaction records, hotel receipts, emails that painted a picture of David's betrayal, was spread out like a web, one that threatened to unravel everything she had once believed in. The weight of her discovery was pressing down on her chest, but she knew it wasn't enough. Not yet. David had been so careful, so deliberate in his manipulation. She could feel him slipping through her fingers even as she tried to grasp the truth. He was always one step ahead, hiding behind a mask of charm, pretending to be the perfect husband. And Emily, her daughter, was still trapped in the illusion, refusing to see what was right in front of her. Ava had to act fast, but she knew that one wrong move could shatter everything: her family, her peace, maybe even her safety. She picked up the phone and dialed the number of a private investigator she had found online. The man's voice was gruff when he answered, but there was a quiet competence in it that Ava liked. She explained the situation in as few words as possible, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and urgency. I need you to gather evidence on my son-in-law, David Bennett. He's involved in something criminal, and I need to expose him. I can't do this alone. The investigator promised to start immediately. Ava hung up the phone, her hands shaking. It was a step forward, but it was a dangerous one. She didn't know how deep David's lies went, how far he would go to protect himself. And she was beginning to realize that if she pushed too hard, too fast, she might be walking into a trap. Ava rubbed her temples, trying to steady herself. She couldn't afford to make a mistake. Not now. Not when everything she had worked for was at stake. She glanced at the clock. It was already late, and she had an appointment with her lawyer tomorrow. Rachel had been pushing her to take a more strategic approach, but Ava could hardly focus. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw David's face, the man she had once trusted, the man who had manipulated his way into her family. Rachel had warned her about rushing into this. You need to be smart, Ava. Don't let your emotions cloud your judgment. You're not just fighting David, you're fighting a system that's been built around him. But Ava wasn't thinking clearly anymore. The urgency in her chest was too strong, too overwhelming. She needed to expose him. She needed to end this. And if she didn't act soon, there might be nothing left to save. The next morning, she met with her lawyer, a sharp woman named Marissa, who had been helping her navigate the legal side of things. Marissa was calm, precise, but Ava could see the concern in her eyes as she explained what she had uncovered. I'm not sure how we can move forward with just this, Marissa said, tapping her pen against the legal pad. We need more concrete evidence. You're going to need something that ties David directly to the criminal activities you're claiming. Ava's heart sank. She had everything she needed to start building a case, but Marissa was right. It wasn't enough to bring David down. Not yet. So, what do we do? Ava's voice cracked, the weight of the situation pressing on her. Marissa met her gaze. We keep gathering evidence. If you're serious about exposing him, we need to be prepared for everything. And that means we'll have to be patient. This could take time. But Ava wasn't sure she had time. Every day that passed felt like another day David was one step closer to getting away with it all. She needed more. She needed to push him harder. She left the meeting feeling both reassured and terrified. The plan was forming, but it wasn't enough. It wouldn't be enough until she had something undeniable. A few days later, the private investigator called with the first round of information. Ava listened closely as he outlined what he had uncovered. More accounts, more hidden assets, and, most troubling of all, links to organizations that were well known for money laundering. Ava's stomach twisted. This wasn't just about her daughter's inheritance. This was bigger. This was dangerous. And David wasn't just a thief. He was a criminal. But there was still a gap in the evidence. Still a key piece missing that would connect David directly to the operations she had uncovered, and Ava knew that without it, the case could fall apart. The investigator had a plan. I've tracked down some of David's contacts. If we can get into his office, I might be able to gather the final documents we need. But we'll have to move quickly. Ava's pulse quickened. How soon? As soon as you're ready, the investigator replied. But we'll need your help. You're the one who can get close to him. The thought of infiltrating David's personal space, of risking everything to expose him, sent a shiver down Ava's spine. But it was the only option left. The only way to finish what she had started. She spent the next few days preparing, gathering the last pieces of the puzzle. But as she sat in her car outside David's office, her hand gripping the door handle, she couldn't help but wonder if she was already too far in. Could she really expose him without destroying everything? The answer was clear. She had no choice. Ava opened the car door and stepped out into the cold air, her heart racing. She was about to take the final step, and she knew that once she crossed that line, there would be no turning back. The room was cold, despite the midday sun streaming through the windows. Ava stood in the center, her back straight, a quiet storm brewing inside her. The evidence was laid out before her, each piece more damning than the last. Bank statements, receipts, recordings, and emails. She had everything she needed to destroy David's world. But as she held the folder in her hands, the weight of it was more than just physical. It was the weight of her daughter's world crashing down around her, of everything she had fought to protect. Emily. Ava's fingers trembled slightly as she placed the folder on the table, staring at it for a moment, as if preparing herself for what was about to happen. She could hear David in the next room, moving about, blissfully unaware of the storm that was about to hit. She had played the part of the dutiful mother and grandmother for far too long. She had stayed silent when her instincts screamed to speak out. But today, she would no longer remain in the shadows. The door creaked open, and David entered, his confident smile faltering for just a split second when he saw her standing there, waiting. "Everything okay?" he asked, though his tone was tight, as if he already knew the answer. Ava's gaze was sharp, unwavering. "We need to talk." David's smile remained, but his eyes were alert now, guarded. "About what?" Ava took a deep breath, the rush of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. This wasn't just about the money. This wasn't just about his betrayal of Emily. It was about the lies he had spun so expertly that no one had even questioned them until now. She stepped forward, the folder heavy in her hands. "About you. About the truth." David's eyes flickered, the shift so subtle that Ava almost missed it. He took a step back, his posture shifting from casual to defensive. "Ava, whatever this is, it's not what you think." Ava opened the folder with deliberate slowness, her heart hammering in her chest. She flipped it open, one page at a time, showing him the records, the hidden accounts, the illegal transfers, the money siphoned from Emily's inheritance. "Tell me this isn't you. Tell me this isn't your doing." David's expression tightened, but his voice remained smooth, practiced. "Ava, you're mistaken. These records, they're not what you think. I don't know where you got this, but it's all just a misunderstanding." Ava's patience snapped. She slammed the folder shut, her fingers digging into the edges, her pulse racing. "Don't you dare lie to me. I've seen enough to know the truth. You've been using Emily's inheritance, hiding money, laundering it. You've been playing her, playing us, and I'm done with it." David's eyes darkened, his jaw tightening. "You've been snooping around, haven't you?" He took a step toward her, his tone now colder, more menacing. "You think you can just waltz in here and destroy everything I've built? This is my life, Ava, not yours." Ava stood her ground, her voice shaking but strong. "This is about your lies, David. You've been lying to everyone, to Emily, to me, and I won't let you get away with it." David's lips curled into a mocking smile. "You think I'm afraid of your little folder of papers? You think this is going to make me crumble?" His voice grew louder. "You don't know anything about what's really going on. You're just a paranoid woman trying to control everything around her." Ava's chest tightened, the venom in his words stinging. But she wouldn't back down. Not now. She took a step closer, matching his intensity. "I know enough. I know everything, David. I know you've been planning to disappear with Emily's money. I know you've been working with criminals, laundering money through those accounts. And I'm not going to let you get away with it." David's eyes flickered with something Ava couldn't quite read. For a moment, she thought she saw a flash of fear, but it was gone too quickly. He clenched his fists, his breath shallow. "Enough," he shouted. "You're wrong, Ava. You don't know what you're talking about. I've been protecting this family. I've been doing everything I can to keep things together, and you come in here, trying to tear it all down. Just then, the door opened behind them, and Emily stepped into the room, her face puzzled. What's going on here? Ava turned, her heart sinking at the sight of her daughter. Emily was standing in the doorway, her posture tense, her eyes flickering between the two of them. David saw his chance. He stepped toward Emily, putting a hand on her shoulder, his voice soft and soothing. Honey, your mom's just upset. She's been reading things into things that aren't true. You know I'd never do anything to hurt you. Emily's eyes darted from David to Ava, her confusion turning into concern. Mom, why are you doing this? David's right. You're making things worse. This isn't helping. You're just causing unnecessary conflict. Ava's heart sank. Emily wasn't just caught in the middle, she was defending him. The man who had been stealing from her, lying to her, and using her trust as a weapon. Emily. Ava's voice cracked with emotion. I'm trying to protect you. Can't you see it? David has been lying to you for months. He's been taking your money, using you. He's been planning to run away with it all, leaving you with nothing. But Emily's face hardened, her lips trembling with frustration. Stop. Just stop. You don't know everything, Mom. David's been nothing but good to me. I can't believe you're doing this. Ava's chest tightened as the words sank in. Emily was too blinded by love, too trusting of the man who had manipulated her at every turn. Ava could feel the distance between them growing wider with every word, every second. David gave Ava a look, cold, calculating, and stepped closer to Emily, wrapping an arm around her. You don't need to listen to her. She's just upset, and she's dragging you into it. Ava felt a bitter knot form in her stomach. This wasn't just about the money. It was about losing her daughter to someone who had no intention of protecting her. She fought to steady her breath, but the truth was there, hanging between them, thick and suffocating. Ava had done everything she could, but it wasn't enough. And now, she was losing her daughter. Section 5. The countermove. The weight of Ava's decision settled like a storm cloud in her chest. The room was quiet now, the echo of her confrontation with David still lingering in the air. But as much as her body ached with exhaustion, as much as the loss of Emily's trust gnawed at her, Ava knew she couldn't back down. This fight, whatever it cost, had to be fought. She sat at her kitchen table, the papers in front of her seeming like an insurmountable mountain. Court filings, statements, evidence, all the things she needed to build a case against David. Fraud, embezzlement, abuse. She'd waited too long for this moment, let too much slide. It was time to take control of the narrative. Her fingers trembled slightly as she dialed the number for her lawyer, Marissa. The line rang once, twice, and then Marissa's steady voice filled the silence. Ava, what's going on? I'm filing, Ava said, the words hardening in her mouth. I'm taking him to court. I'm not backing down. I have everything I need to expose him. There was a brief silence on the other end. Are you sure about this, Ava? David won't let this go easily. He's not just going to roll over. I don't care, Ava replied, her voice raw with determination. I've had enough. It's time for the world to see him for who he really is. All right, Marissa said after a beat. I'll prepare the documents. We'll hit him with everything we have. Ava could hear the quiet support in Marissa's voice, but beneath it, there was concern. She wasn't naive enough to think that David wouldn't fight back. He was a master of manipulation, of spinning his lies until they became the truth. But Ava was done being scared. She ended the call and sat back, letting the moment settle over her. The decision had been made. She was no longer just Ava, the protective mother. She was a force ready to expose the truth. and she would stop at nothing. But David wasn't one to be backed into a corner without retaliation. The very next day, the first of his attacks came. A post on social media, a picture of Ava, a carefully curated image of her looking disheveled, accompanied by a rant about how she was a jealous, paranoid woman who had lost touch with reality. His words were sharp, dripping with disdain, painting her as the villain in a twisted, one-sided narrative. Ava stared at the screen, her stomach tightening. The words he had chosen were calculated, designed to isolate her, to make her seem unhinged, to turn the world against her before she could turn the truth against him. She fought back the urge to respond, to lash out with everything she had. Instead, she closed her phone and focused on what mattered. The case. It was all she could control. The next few weeks became a blur. Ava plunged herself into the paperwork, spending late nights poring over evidence, organizing it into a precise, unassailable argument. She made copies of everything: David's secret accounts, the hidden transfers, the evidence of money laundering. With each new detail she uncovered, she felt the weight of the case growing, but so did the pressure on her own mind. Rachel had warned her to stay calm, to take a measured approach. "Don't let the anger consume you," she'd said, her voice filled with caution. "You can't fight a smear campaign with more emotion. They'll use that against you." Ava tried to listen, but it was hard. It was so hard. Each time David's name came up, whether in the news, through a new post on social media, or in a phone call with Emily, Ava felt the sting. She had no idea how deep David's influence went, how much of her daughter's faith in him he had twisted, how much he had manipulated the people around her. His threats were escalating, subtle but effective, sending her into isolation. Friends who once checked in stopped calling. Neighbors who had once smiled at her in the grocery store turned away, their eyes filled with suspicion. The lies were taking root, and Ava was alone in her fight. One evening, as she sat alone in her living room, her face illuminated by the cold glow of her laptop, she received another message. This one was a text from Emily. "Mom, I don't know what to believe anymore. David says you're trying to destroy our family, that you've been lying about everything. I need some time." Ava's heart shattered as she read those words. How had it come to this? How had David turned Emily, her daughter, the one person she had fought so fiercely to protect, against her? She stared at the screen for what felt like an eternity, the truth hanging heavy in the air, suffocating her. She had done everything right. She had given Emily everything, and now it felt like she was losing her to the very man who had torn their family apart. But she couldn't afford to break now. With a deep, steadying breath, Ava placed her phone down and stood up. She looked out the window at the dark sky, the streets below quiet and still. She felt a fleeting moment of peace before the weight of everything pressed back down on her shoulders. There was no going back. This was it. Her family. Her life. It was all on the line. But she would see this through, no matter the cost. She was done being afraid. And as the night stretched on, Ava began drafting her next step. Ready to fight. Ready to expose David for everything he was. There was no more room for doubt. The war had only just begun. Ava sat in her lawyer's office, the thick folder of evidence laid out between them. The weight of it seemed to grow heavier with every passing moment. Her hands rested on the table, but her fingers were clenched into tight fists, as if trying to hold on to the final shred of control in a world that was slowly slipping away. "I've reviewed everything," Marissa said, her voice measured and calm, but the concern in her eyes betrayed the gravity of the situation. "This is enough to go after him for fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering. We have a solid case." Ava nodded, the familiar rush of resolve flooding her chest. "Then let's file. Let's end this." Marissa hesitated, pushing the folder aside slightly. Ava, you need to understand that David won't take this lightly. He's powerful. He's connected. You're not just fighting for justice, you're fighting for your family's future, and his retaliation will come fast, and it will come hard. Ava took a deep breath, steadying herself. I've been through enough already. He's already taken everything from me. The lies, the manipulation. I can't let him get away with it. Marissa nodded. We'll file the lawsuit. But you need to prepare yourself. He's not going to sit back and let this happen. He'll do whatever it takes to destroy you. Ava's heart sank, but she refused to let the fear show. She had already come this far. She couldn't back down now. Not with everything on the line. The next morning, Ava stood in front of her house, staring out at the quiet street. Her thoughts felt like a storm. Every part of her pulled in 1,000 different directions. She was about to launch a legal battle that would change everything. And though the truth was on her side, she couldn't shake the feeling that David was about to unleash something far worse than she could imagine. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her from her thoughts. She looked down at the screen. Emily. Mom, we need to talk. Ava's chest tightened. She had been waiting for this moment, the moment when Emily might finally start questioning David's lies. She swiped to answer, her voice low and tentative. Emily, is everything okay? I don't know, Mom. Emily's voice was strained. I've been looking at the things you sent me, the evidence. But it's hard to... I mean, I don't want to believe it. I don't want to believe that David would do something like that. Ava closed her eyes, feeling the sharp ache of the situation. I know it's hard, but Emily, you have to understand. He's been lying to you, using you, taking what's yours. There was a long pause. Ava could hear Emily's breathing, shaky on the other end of the line. I know you're trying to protect me, but I need some time to process all of this, okay? Ava swallowed, the words hanging in her throat. I'll always be here for you, Emily, whenever you're ready. But deep down, Ava knew the truth. Emily wasn't just questioning David. She was questioning Ava's integrity. The distance between them was growing, and no matter how much Ava loved her, there was nothing she could do to bridge that gap. Not yet. As the days wore on, the first salvo from David came. It wasn't a quiet response. It wasn't just a few words on social media. David's retaliation came with a full-throttle attack. He hired a public relations firm to launch a smear campaign against Ava, painting her as an unstable, delusional woman who was bent on destroying the life he had worked so hard to build. The media picked up the story. Neighbors, once friendly, began to whisper behind closed doors. Ava could feel it, the isolation creeping in on her once again. The phone calls from her lawyer came more frequently now, with Marissa urging Ava to stay strong, to hold the line. He's doing this to provoke you, Ava. Don't react. Let's focus on the legal battle. This is how he plays the game. But every day the walls closed in a little more. Every new accusation, every media article, every whispered comment made Ava feel like she was being buried alive in a world of lies. David wasn't just playing a game, he was out for blood. And he wouldn't stop until he had everything: her reputation, her family, her peace. At night, when the silence became unbearable, Ava would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with thoughts of Emily, of her broken trust, and of the mountain of evidence that was only growing. Ava's friends stopped calling. The neighbors stopped waving. The isolation felt suffocating, but the worst part of it all was the hollow ache in her chest, the realization that the person she was fighting for, her daughter, was drifting further and further away from her. The case was progressing, the documents piling up as her lawyer worked tirelessly to prepare their strategy. But with every passing day, Ava could feel the emotional toll weighing on her. She wasn't just fighting for justice anymore. She was fighting for her daughter's love, her family's future, her own peace of mind. And each new assault from David, each new lie, chipped away at her strength. One evening, Ava sat at the kitchen table, the stack of papers in front of her blurred by tears she refused to shed. She thought of everything she had lost, her trust in David, her daughter's belief in her, the community that had once welcomed her. She was fighting on so many fronts now. The phone buzzed again. Another message from Emily. "Mom, I've been thinking about everything. I'm coming over tomorrow. We need to talk." Ava held her breath, the message hanging in the air like a fragile thread. Maybe, just maybe, Emily was starting to see the truth. Or perhaps it was just the beginning of the end. Either way, the battle wasn't over. It was only just beginning. Ava's hands trembled as she sifted through the documents. The weight of the past few months was crashing down on her all at once. Each paper she pulled from the pile felt like another stone added to the burden she was carrying. She had thought she knew everything there was to know about David's betrayal, his lies, his manipulation, his greed. But today, she had found something new, something deeper. The last few days had been a whirlwind of discovery. With her lawyer's help, Ava had gained access to further financial records, private accounts, and, most damning of all, connections that linked David to organized crime. The new evidence was like a knife twisting in her gut. Not only had David stolen from Emily, but he had been laundering money through an intricate network of shell companies. His criminal dealings stretched far beyond what she had ever imagined. There were wire transfers to international accounts, shady offshore companies, and even names of known criminals that David had been working with. Ava sat back in her chair, the files in front of her starting to blur. She could feel the ground shifting beneath her feet. What had begun as a fight to protect her daughter from a manipulative husband had now become something far darker. A battle against an organized criminal enterprise, with David as its orchestrator. And yet, despite everything, part of her still couldn't believe it. Emily still hadn't fully grasped the truth. There had been glimmers of doubt in her voice, but each time, David had pulled her back into his web of lies. Ava pressed her palms into her eyes, fighting the tears. It felt like a sickening game of tug-of-war. And she wasn't sure how much longer she could keep pulling. She hadn't heard from Emily for a couple of days. The last conversation had been strained, full of doubts and fears. But Ava had seen the flicker of realization in Emily's eyes. She had seen the questions begin to form. It was only a matter of time before the truth came to the surface. Still, every moment felt like a countdown. Ava's phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. She glanced at the screen. It was Emily. "I'm coming over. I need to see you." "Please, Mom." Ava's heart raced. This was it. She had to be strong now, not just for herself, but for Emily. But the weight of the knowledge she carried felt like it would crush her if she wasn't careful. She didn't have much time. David was making his final moves. He was planning to flee with Emily's inheritance. The papers he'd filed to liquidate the assets were already in motion. Ava knew he'd been preparing to skip town, but she couldn't let him take everything. Not when they were so close to bringing him down. Ava stood in the hallway, her back to the door. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of the kitchen light. The doorbell rang, and Ava's pulse quickened. She knew this conversation would either tear them apart forever or, if she was lucky, bring them closer to the truth. Emily walked in, her face pale, her eyes red from lack of sleep. The moment their gazes locked, Ava knew. Emily was torn. She could see it in the way her daughter stood, hesitant, as though she had finally started to connect the dots, but wasn't yet ready to accept the full picture. "Ava, Emily's voice faltered as she spoke. I've been looking into everything you gave me, and I see it now. I see what David's been doing. But Mom, she paused, struggling for words. I can't. Ava's heart lurched. This was the moment, the one she had been dreading. Her daughter was standing on the precipice, ready to make a decision that could either save or destroy them both. Emily, I've never wanted to hurt you, Ava said, her voice low and steady. But this man, David, is dangerous. He's been using you. He's been stealing from you. And he's been lying to everyone, even you. Tears welled in Emily's eyes, but she didn't back away. I know, Mom. I know what he's done. But I feel like I don't even know who he really is anymore. And I don't know if I can handle this. If I can handle losing everything, including him. Ava reached for her daughter's hand, her heart breaking at the pain in her eyes. You're not losing him, Emily. You're saving yourself. You're saving us both. Emily shook her head, the weight of her words heavy in the silence between them. But I don't know if I can forgive you either. Ava swallowed, the sting of those words sharp against the fragile thread of hope she'd been holding on to. I'm sorry. I wish I could have done more sooner. But this is about saving you from the lies, from the darkness he's wrapped you in. You can't keep walking into that storm, honey. Not for him. Not anymore. Before Emily could respond, the door creaked open, and a voice, calm, steady, and dripping with malice, came from the hallway. Is this how it's going to be, Ava? David's voice cut through the air like a blade. Ava's heart skipped a beat. She had prepared herself for this moment. But the dread that filled her now was unlike anything she had ever known. David stepped into the room, his face a mask of barely contained fury. His eyes scanned the room, landing on Emily, then on Ava. You think you've won? You think you can destroy me with your little lies and your threats? You don't know who you're dealing with. Ava stood her ground, her body tense, every muscle screaming at her to back down. But she couldn't. Not now. You're done, David. This is over. You won't get away with it. David's smile was cold, predatory. You think I'm going to just let you take everything from me? You don't understand. This is just the beginning. Ava's blood ran cold as the realization hit. He was planning something. His desperation had reached its peak, and now he would stop at nothing. David wasn't just trying to win anymore. He was trying to destroy her. And as he turned toward Emily, his final words hit her like a punch to the gut. You've made a terrible mistake, Ava. You've brought this all on yourself. Ava's hand clenched into a fist. It wasn't over. Not yet. She was ready. And David was about to make the biggest mistake of his life. Ava's heart raced as she stood on the cold concrete of the airport parking lot, the low hum of the planes in the distance. A reminder of how close David was to escaping everything he had done. This was it, the final moment. She had spent weeks preparing for this, carefully orchestrating every detail of the trap, and now there was no turning back. The evidence was airtight. David had attempted to liquidate Emily's inheritance, the money that rightfully belonged to her daughter. It was clear he had every intention of running. But Ava wasn't going to let him get away with it. Not this time. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her from her thoughts. It was Marissa, her lawyer. We're in position. Marissa's voice came through the line, steady but tinged with urgency. You know what to do. Once he makes the move, we'll step in. Ava closed her eyes, steadying her breath. She had already arranged for the police to intercept David and his associates the moment they tried to leave the country. She had gathered everything, bank statements, contracts, and now the final piece. The travel arrangements he'd made under false names, all funded by stolen money. Her eyes darted to the entrance where she could already see David and one of his associates, a man she didn't recognize, walking towards the gate. He was carrying a bag, his movements hurried, but controlled. He didn't think anyone was watching. Emily hadn't been here. Not yet. But she was about to. Ava had to keep it together, keep her emotions in check. She needed her daughter to understand, to see the truth. And this was the moment that would make it all clear. The minutes dragged by, each one heavier than the last. Ava felt the cold grip of fear twist in her stomach. What if something went wrong? What if David found a way to slip through? She couldn't let that happen. Not after everything she had sacrificed. She had lost too much already. Then, as if on cue, her phone vibrated again. It was Emily. "I'm here. I just parked." "Where are you?" Ava's heart pounded as she read the message. Emily was about to walk into the very heart of the storm. Ava quickly typed a reply. "I'm in the airport parking lot." "You need to stay calm, Emily. Just follow my lead." She glanced at David one more time, now standing at the counter talking to a clerk. He had no idea what was coming. Ava's pulse quickened. She could hear the faint voices of the officers in her earpiece as they moved into position. Just as she was about to move toward the gate, she heard a voice behind her. "Ava." She froze. Emily was standing there, looking at her with a mixture of confusion and concern in her eyes. Ava turned to face her, forcing a smile, trying to hold back the flood of emotion. "Emily, What's going on?" Emily cut in, her voice tight. "Why are we here? Why didn't you tell me?" Ava's chest tightened. This was it. This was the moment. She could see the doubt in Emily's eyes, the same doubt she had seen for weeks. But this time, there was something different in her daughter's gaze. Something that had shifted, even if only just a little. "David's leaving," Ava said, her voice steady. "He's taking the money. Your inheritance. He's been planning this for months, Emily." Emily's face paled, and Ava could see the fight playing out behind her eyes, the battle between the man she had loved and the truth that her mother was trying to reveal. "I know," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I know now. I saw the transfers. I saw everything." Ava's heart swelled with a mixture of relief and fear. Emily was finally starting to see, but the hurt was still there, lingering in the space between them. The moment hung in the air like a fragile thread. And then, David turned. His eyes locked with Ava's, and in that instant, everything fell into place. He was trapped. David's face twisted in fury, the mask of control slipping for just a second as he realized what had happened. "You think you've won, don't you?" His voice was low, dangerous. "You think this is over? You've made a huge mistake, Ava. You've ruined everything." But before he could take another step, the police were on him, surrounding him with swift precision. His associate tried to move, but they were immediately detained. Ava stood frozen, watching as David was handcuffed, his angry protests filling the air, but the noise seemed distant. All that mattered was the truth that had finally come to light, the weight of all their suffering now starting to lift. Emily stepped forward, her face pale but resolute. She didn't say anything at first. She didn't need to. The look she gave Ava spoke volumes. There was pain there, but also something else. Understanding. David struggled, shouting threats, but the officers remained unfazed, securing him and his associate, preparing to take them away. The life David had built, all the lies and manipulation, was collapsing in real time. Ava finally stepped forward, looking at Emily. "You're safe now," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're free from him, and I'll always be here for you." Emily's lips trembled. She finally looked up at Ava, her eyes filled with tears. "I don't know how to thank you. I don't even know what to say." "You don't need to say anything." Ava wrapped her arms around her, pulling her close. "I did it because I love you." and as the weight of everything they had been through settled between them, Ava knew that the real battle wasn't just about exposing David. It was about rebuilding what had been broken, piece by piece. The truth had been revealed, and though it had cost them dearly, they had survived. For the first time in what felt like forever, Ava allowed herself to breathe. And for the first time in so long, she felt a flicker of hope for the future. The courtroom was quiet, save for the steady hum of anticipation that seemed to vibrate through the air. Ava sat in the back, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her heart still racing despite knowing the end was near. The trial had stretched on for weeks, and David had fought tooth and nail, manipulating the system, twisting the narrative, trying to convince everyone that he was the victim. But now, it was almost over. The jury had returned their verdict, and the judge was preparing to announce it. Ava took a deep breath, her eyes fixed on the front of the courtroom. The memories of everything that had led to this moment, the lies, the deceit, the pain, flashed through her mind. It felt like a lifetime ago that she had first discovered David's betrayal, but here she was, on the verge of reclaiming everything she had lost. The judge's voice broke through her thoughts. We, the jury, find the defendant, David Bennett, guilty of fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering. Ava's chest tightened, the weight of the moment crashing down on her. Her legs wobbled slightly, but she remained seated, holding on to the strength that had carried her through this fight. For the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to feel something beyond the fear and anxiety that had been her constant companions. A small breath of relief, a flicker of victory. David's face was twisted in disbelief, his jaw clenched as the verdict was read aloud. He had spent years constructing a life of lies, but now the walls were crumbling around him. The courtroom filled with a low murmur of satisfaction from the people in the gallery, but Ava only had eyes for one person, Emily. Her daughter sat beside her, her hands trembling in her lap, but her gaze was steady, something new in her eyes. It wasn't the distant, distrustful look from before. There was no more confusion, no more uncertainty. In its place, there was understanding, and maybe a glimmer of peace. David was led away in handcuffs, his face contorted with anger, his once perfect world shattered. Ava watched him go, feeling a sense of closure settle in her chest. He had tried to tear apart her family, but in the end, the truth had prevailed. The weight of the battle was finally lifting, but the toll it had taken on them both, was still there. Emily didn't speak as the proceedings wrapped up. She simply stood and walked with Ava to the door, her steps slow but purposeful. Outside the courthouse, the bright sunlight made everything feel surreal. Ava could feel the eyes of the public on her, the whispers of recognition beginning to stir. But it didn't matter. None of it mattered anymore. The fight was over, and the battle had been won. In the weeks that followed, Ava found herself rebuilding not just her life, but the life she had shared with Emily. The emotional scars weren't easily healed, but every small step they took, every conversation, every shared moment of quiet understanding, was progress. Emily had struggled to reclaim a sense of self after the betrayal, but she was slowly learning how to live without the shadow of David hanging over her. Ava had become her rock once again, the anchor she had always been, but now with a deeper understanding of the strength they both shared. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Emily looked over at her mother with a quiet smile. "I don't know how to thank you for all of this," she said softly. "For everything. I've been angry with you, confused, but now I see. You did it because you love me, and I can't hate you for that." Ava reached across the table and took Emily's hand in hers. "You don't have to thank me, sweetheart. I did what I had to do. And I'll always be here for you, no matter what." The words felt like a promise, one that Ava knew she would keep for the rest of her life. Ava's reputation in the community began to shift. slowly at first, but with undeniable force. The woman who had once been quietly respected as a teacher, a mother, and a friend was now seen as something more, a survivor, a warrior. Her courage had not only exposed David's crimes, but had brought a new awareness to the community about the dangers of manipulation and financial abuse. People began to approach her, offering gratitude for her bravery in standing up against the truth, for exposing the darkness behind the facade of the man they had once admired. One afternoon, as Ava was returning home from a meeting, she was approached by a woman from a local women's organization. The woman introduced herself and explained that Ava's story had inspired others who had suffered in silence, and that they wanted to honor her for her strength and resilience. Ava stood a little stunned as the woman presented her with a small plaque, a recognition of her courage in the face of overwhelming odds. For a moment, she didn't know how to react. The recognition felt surreal, like something she wasn't sure she deserved. But as she looked at the plaque, her eyes drifted to Emily, standing just a few feet away, watching her mother with a quiet pride in her eyes. And in that moment, Ava realized that this was her true reward: the rebuilding of her family, the healing of wounds that would take time but were finally beginning to close. Later that evening, as the sky darkened and the stars began to peek through the expanse of the night, Ava and Emily sat on the porch, side by side, just like they used to. "You know, Mom," Emily said, her voice soft, "I don't think I could have made it through this without you." Ava smiled, her heart full. "We made it through it together." And as they sat there, the sound of crickets in the air and the quiet of the night wrapping around them, Ava realized that, after everything, they had both emerged stronger. The storm had passed. The battle was over. And for the first time in a long time, Ava could finally breathe easy. The future, once clouded with uncertainty, was now bright with possibility. The sun had barely risen when Ava sat down at her kitchen table, the cool morning light spilling over the stacks of paper in front of her. She stared at the blank page of the notebook in front of her, unsure of where to begin. How do you condense the years of pain, the battles fought, the wounds healed, into a single story? She had never imagined this day would come. Not like this. Not with the world watching. But now, it was time to share her story. To take everything she had fought for and turn it into something that could help others. She wasn't just writing for herself anymore. She was writing for the countless women who had suffered in silence, for the families torn apart by manipulation and deceit. Ava picked up her pen, and the words began to spill out. When I first found out what David was doing, I was shattered. Not just by the lies, but by the person I thought I knew so well. The man I had welcomed into my family, the man I had trusted, was not the person I had imagined. But the hardest part wasn't realizing he had been lying to me. It was realizing he had been lying to my daughter. And that, more than anything, was what hurt the most. Ava paused, her hand stilling on the page as the emotions of the past few years threatened to overwhelm her. She wiped away the tear that had slipped down her cheek, taking a deep breath before continuing. David's manipulation didn't just affect me, it affected my daughter, Emily. He wasn't just taking money, he was taking her trust, her peace of mind, and her future. And the hardest part wasn't knowing what he had done. It was trying to help her see the truth when she wasn't ready to believe it. I couldn't stop him. Not until I had the evidence, the proof that would shatter his carefully constructed lies. Ava closed her eyes for a moment, reflecting on the many sleepless nights, the endless hours of fighting back tears, of fear and exhaustion. But now, as she wrote these words, she felt lighter. The weight of the truth was still there, but she had learned to carry it. For Emily, for herself. But I didn't fight alone. I had help. My friends, my lawyer, and most importantly, my daughter. Though it was painful, Emily started to see the truth. It wasn't easy, but we got through it together. And today, I stand here not just as a survivor, but as a mother who will never give up on her family, no matter what. Ava took a deep breath, letting the moment of clarity wash over her. She had written the truth, her truth. But it was only part of the story. It was time for the world to hear what she had learned through all of this. In the end, it wasn't just about fighting for what was rightfully ours. It was about rebuilding a sense of safety, a sense of self. It was about finding the strength to speak out when so many others remained silent. My hope is that by sharing my story, other women and families facing similar struggles will find the courage to speak up, to ask for help, and to never stop fighting for the truth. Financial abuse is real. It takes so much more than money. It takes your soul, your dignity, your trust. But it doesn't have to define you. She set the pen down, staring at the words on the page. This wasn't just a letter. It was her declaration of strength, her declaration of love. The fight she had started with David wasn't just about winning. It was about reclaiming everything that had been stolen from her. Ava made a final edit, taking a moment to read the letter one last time before she slid it into an envelope. The local newspaper had agreed to run it, and she knew that this would be her chance to reach people beyond the small circle she had known. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore, she was fighting for others, for the women who had been silenced, for the families torn apart by manipulation and control. The letter hit the streets 2 days later. The response was overwhelming. The article detailing Ava's journey, her triumphs, and the lessons she had learned was shared far and wide. Readers reached out with their own stories, their own struggles, their own fight for freedom. For the first time in a long time, Ava felt a deep sense of purpose. She had taken her pain and turned it into something that would change lives. A few days later, Ava received a call. The local women's organization wanted to honor her. They invited her to speak at their annual event, a gathering to raise awareness about financial abuse. Ava hesitated for a moment. She wasn't sure if she was ready to speak in front of a crowd, to share her story on such a public platform. But then she thought of Emily, of the women who had reached out to her, of the courage it had taken to write that letter. She had to do this, not just for herself, but for the countless others who were still trapped in the same darkness she had been in. On the night of the event, Ava stood at the podium, her hands resting on the edge as the audience waited in silence. She looked out into the crowd, some familiar faces, many new ones. But they all had one thing in common. They had come to hear the truth, and Ava was ready to give it to them. "I'm here tonight to tell you that you are not alone," she began, her voice strong. "I've been where you are. I've felt the fear, the doubt, the shame. But I'm here to tell you that there is a way out. It's not easy, and it's not quick. But it's possible. And I promise you, you can get through it." As she spoke, Ava could see the glimmer of hope in the eyes of those around her. She wasn't just sharing her story. She was giving them the courage to take their own steps toward freedom. When the speech ended, there was a long moment of silence before the crowd erupted into applause. Ava stood there, humbled, feeling an overwhelming sense of gratitude. That night, as she sat with Emily in their quiet home, Ava realized that this moment, this new chapter, wasn't just about justice. It was about the life they were building together, the healing, the love. And for the first time in years, Ava felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. The sun was low on the horizon, casting long shadows through the window as Ava sat at the kitchen table, pen in hand, surrounded by a sea of legal documents. The weight of the last few months had pressed her into a quiet space of reflection, but today there was something new, a sense of resolution. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was taking control of her future. The fight against David was over in the eyes of the law, but in her heart, it wasn't enough. Ava wasn't about to let him or his associates haunt her any longer. Not after everything they had been through. Not after the years of manipulation, the lies that had almost destroyed everything she had built. Her lawyer, Marissa, had helped her navigate through the process of securing her assets. But now it was time to make sure David couldn't touch her or Emily again. She had already begun setting up a trust to protect Emily's inheritance, making sure no one could siphon it off like David had tried to. She had to secure everything that was rightfully theirs. This was the first step to rebuilding, and it was one she would take alone for her daughter's future. As Ava signed the final page of the documents, a sense of relief washed over her. The legal protections were in place. The trust had been set up. She was finally free of the threat that had loomed over her for so long. But as the pen clicked shut, she knew that the hardest part was still to come. Emily had been through so much. Ava had watched her daughter battle the ghosts of the past, the emotional scars of David's manipulation still fresh in her eyes. Emily had started to see the truth, but it was going to take more than just that moment of clarity to heal the damage. It was time for Emily to begin her own journey of recovery. Ava had arranged for Emily to begin therapy, understanding that healing was a long and difficult process. The walls Emily had built around her heart over the years were thick, fortified by the years of emotional manipulation. Ava didn't know how long it would take, but she had to believe that Emily could overcome it, just as she had. They would heal together, at their own pace. Emily had agreed, reluctantly at first, but there was a quiet willingness in her now. The therapy sessions weren't easy, Ava knew, but they were necessary. Her daughter had to learn how to break free from the invisible chains David had wrapped around her. Ava's phone buzzed, dragging her back from her thoughts. It was a message from Marissa, confirming the final details of the restraining order. "Everything is in place. You'll be protected. David and his associates won't be able to get anywhere near you or Emily." Ava exhaled slowly, feeling the last pieces fall into place. David and everyone connected to him would be kept at arm's length. She had drawn the line, made it clear that this was their life now, and there would be no more room for anyone who wanted to take it away from them. The days that followed felt like a blur of finality. Ava didn't hesitate to enforce her boundaries. She began taking steps to isolate herself from the people who had once been associated with David, friends who had sided with him, even acquaintances who had turned a blind eye. She no longer needed them in her life. One afternoon, as she and Emily were walking back from the store, the quiet peace of their day was shattered by the screeching sound of tires. Ava's head snapped around as a dark car sped past them, the occupants inside staring at them with cold, predatory eyes. Her blood ran cold, but she didn't let it show. She turned to Emily, her voice steady, though her heart was hammering in her chest. "Get inside now," Ava ordered, her voice sharp. Emily's face paled as she followed her mother to the door, but Ava's instincts were already on high alert. Something wasn't right. Within minutes, she was on the phone with Marissa, her voice clipped. "I need the police. Now." Marissa's voice was immediately calm. "What happened?" "A car just drove by. I'm sure it's one of his associates. I need protection. I'm not letting anyone near my family." It wasn't long before the police arrived, their presence a firm reminder that David's reach wasn't as powerful as it had been. They swept the area, noting the car's make and model, and assured Ava that they would be keeping a close watch on the house. The next few days were tense. Ava didn't sleep well, her mind constantly running through worst-case scenarios. She couldn't afford to let her guard down. Not now. David had lost everything, but he was dangerous, and there was no telling how far he'd go to keep control. But the police were taking her seriously. With the restraining order in place, David's ability to intimidate them was limited. There was a sense of safety, but it was fragile. Ava knew the threats would keep coming, though they would now be made in the shadows rather than in the open. Still, despite the fear, she stood firm. This was her family, her future, and nothing was going to take that away from her. One night, as she sat in the quiet of her living room, Emily came in, a small, hesitant smile tugging at her lips. She had been distant lately, wrapped up in the process of healing, but tonight, there was something different in her eyes. "Mom," Emily began, her voice soft, "I just wanted to say thank you for everything." Ava looked up, meeting her daughter's gaze. The words, so simple yet so powerful, filled her with a warmth that she hadn't felt in so long. "We'll get through this," Ava replied, her voice steady. "Together." As Emily moved to sit beside her, Ava realized that the hardest part of all of this, the fear, the loss, the pain, was behind them. They had rebuilt, step by step, and though the future was still uncertain, they would face it together. And as the darkness of the night enveloped them, Ava knew one thing for sure. They were safe, and no one, nothing, could take that from them again. Ava sat in the small cafe, the warm sunlight filtering through the windows, but her mind was somewhere else. The past few months had been a whirlwind: court battles, restraining orders, endless negotiations. But today, for the first time in a long time, the noise had quieted. The fight for survival was over, but the cost had been steep. The strain of the legal battles, the constant fear of what might happen next, had taken its toll. Ava's hands shook slightly as she stirred her coffee, but the feeling of relief was undeniable. It wasn't just the end of David's tyranny, it was the beginning of something new. Her friends had been her anchors through the storm. Rachel, always there with words of encouragement, and Marissa, guiding her through the legal labyrinth, had kept her grounded. But more than that, the community around her had begun to show a respect she hadn't expected. The whispers that had once been filled with suspicion and judgment were now full of admiration. She was no longer just Ava, the quiet mother in the background, but Ava, the survivor, the woman who had fought back and won. She had built this quiet moment of peace, but it wasn't just for herself. It was for Emily too. The journey of recovery had been just as difficult for her daughter, but now, as they sat together in the quiet of their home, there was something different between them, an unspoken understanding that hadn't been there before. Emily's healing process had been long, and there were days when it felt like they weren't moving forward, but the therapy had made a difference. The distance that had once stretched between them, filled with confusion and guilt, was now slowly closing. Their bond had been tested, but it had come out stronger than ever. "Mom, I've been thinking," Emily said one night, her voice still soft, but no longer weighed down by the anger she had carried for so long. "I think I finally understand. You didn't just do it for me, you did it for both of us. And I'm glad you did." Ava looked at her daughter, her heart swelling with pride. She had always hoped for this moment, the moment when Emily would no longer carry the weight of the past. "I'll always do what I can to protect you, Emily," she said, her voice steady, "and you're stronger than you know." The weight of the past still lingered in their lives, but it didn't have the power it once had. They were beginning to rebuild, not just their lives, but the trust that had been shattered. Together, they were learning how to be whole again. Ava's life had taken on new meaning. As the community began to see her for who she really was, a woman who had survived and thrived despite the odds, they sought her out. She became a mentor, someone who could guide other women through the darkness she had emerged from. Her story resonated with so many, and she spoke at various support groups and forums, sharing her experience, offering a hand to those still struggling. In those moments, Ava realized something profound. In helping others, she was healing too. The scars of her past no longer defined her. They were a part of her story, but they no longer had the power to control her future. She became involved in charity work for victims of financial fraud and abuse, pouring herself into the cause with a passion that surprised even her. She'd always been a quiet, private person, but this new role felt like a calling. It was her way of giving back, of making sure that no one else had to go through what she had endured. And the community began to take notice. People who had once whispered about her now approached her with respect, admiration, and gratitude. They saw in her a resilience they hadn't known was possible. She was no longer just a victim. She was a beacon of hope for others who were still trapped in their own struggles. Emily's progress continued, each day a little brighter than the last. She had completed her therapy, her heart now free from the invisible chains David had placed around it. She was finally starting to see herself, not as the victim of a manipulative man, but as a young woman reclaiming her life. One afternoon, as Emily was getting ready to go out, she paused at the door, her eyes meeting Ava's. "You know, Mom, I feel like I'm starting a new chapter in my life, and it's a chapter I'm actually excited to write." Ava's heart swelled with joy. "I'm proud of you, Emily. You've come so far." The phone call came unexpectedly, just as Ava was finishing up a meeting at a local women's shelter. It was a national organization, one that focused on financial abuse, and they wanted her to speak on a televised program about overcoming financial control and manipulation. The offer took Ava by surprise. She had never imagined her story would reach so far. But she knew, deep down, that this was another step forward. Another opportunity to turn her pain into purpose. "I don't know if I'm ready for that kind of spotlight," she admitted to Rachel later that evening, pacing her kitchen. "You're more ready than you think," Rachel reassured her, her voice full of conviction. "Your story is powerful, and it needs to be heard. It's not about the spotlight, Ava. It's about the lives you'll touch." Ava took a deep breath, the weight of the decision settling on her shoulders. This was bigger than her now. This was for every woman who had felt invisible, who had suffered in silence. If sharing her story could help just one person, it would be worth it. The night of the televised interview, Ava stood backstage, her nerves a mix of fear and anticipation. The lights were bright, the cameras rolling, but in that moment she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: peace. She had found her voice, and now it was time to share it with the world. When they called her name, Ava walked confidently onto the stage, her hands steady, her heart full. As she sat down and looked into the camera, she thought of Emily, of all the women she'd met through her work, each one with a story of their own. She was no longer just Ava Bennett. She was their voice. "I'm here to tell you that you can break free," she said, her voice strong. "No matter how dark it seems, there is always a way out. And you don't have to do it alone." The camera held her gaze, and in that moment, Ava knew. This was the life she was meant to lead. Not just surviving, but helping others survive. And as the applause filled the studio, she couldn't help but smile. Because this was her piece. The bright lights of the television studio were blinding as Ava stepped onto the stage, but she didn't feel the usual sense of fear that had accompanied so many of the moments in her life. Instead, a quiet strength settled within her, rooted deep in the knowledge that she had already won. The battle for herself, for Emily, for their future, had already been fought. Tonight, she was just telling the world her story. She looked out at the audience, all eyes on her, and for a moment, she felt a wave of emotion crash over her. The years of pain, the nights of silence, the battles against David's manipulations, it all seemed so far away now. In the distance, she could almost see the woman she had once been, a woman too afraid to speak out, too trapped in the shadows of someone else's control. But here she was now, her truth in her hands, her voice loud and steady. I'm here today because I was once where so many of you are. Ava began, her voice strong but filled with the weight of her journey. I was trapped in a lie so carefully spun, I couldn't see it. My life was controlled by someone I thought I could trust. Someone who told me I was crazy, who manipulated me into thinking I wasn't strong enough to survive without him. But I am here to tell you today, you are not crazy, you are not broken, and you are not alone. The camera panned across the audience, capturing the faces of men and women who were listening with rapt attention. Some had tears in their eyes. Others sat with clenched fists, the truth of her words striking home. Ava didn't shy away from the weight of her story. She didn't rush through it. She spoke slowly, deliberately, as though each word was a stone being placed in the foundation of something that could never be taken away. When I found out what David was really doing, what he had been doing behind closed doors, it felt like my entire world had collapsed. But the real breakthrough didn't come until I realized I wasn't the only one he had hurt. I wasn't the only one who had been manipulated, controlled, and silenced. It was my daughter, Emily, who finally helped me see that I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for her future, too. Ava's eyes swept across the room and caught Emily's gaze, seated in the front row. Her daughter, once so uncertain, so bound by the invisible chains David had wrapped around her, now looked back at her with a quiet but unwavering strength. Emily smiled at her, a soft, knowing smile. She had come a long way. Emily is my strength, Ava continued, her voice thick with emotion. We've been through so much together. But we've also built something new, a bond stronger than anything I could have imagined. And I want all of you to know that no matter where you're standing right now, there is hope. There is a way out. And together, we can find it. The audience was silent, hanging on every word. Ava felt the truth of her words wash over her like a balm, her own healing unfolding in front of an entire nation. It was catharsis. It was freedom. And in that moment, it was the most powerful thing she had ever done. When the speech ended, the applause was deafening. Ava blinked back tears as she stood there, her heart pounding in her chest. But it wasn't the applause that mattered. It was the people in the audience who had been moved by her story, the people who saw themselves in her words, the people who would now find the courage to speak out. That was the real victory. Afterward, as Ava stepped off the stage, Emily was waiting for her, her arms wide. They embraced, and for the first time in years, Ava felt a deep, profound peace settle over her. The weight of everything she had fought for, everything she had feared losing, was gone. She was free. And Emily was free. They both were. In the weeks that followed, Ava's story continued to resonate. She received messages from people across the country, thanking her for sharing her truth, for inspiring them to leave abusive relationships, to take back control of their lives. Some were women who had been financially manipulated, others who had been emotionally controlled. But the common thread was the same. Ava's strength had given them the courage to fight back. And now, Ava was determined to keep that momentum going. She had spent too long in the shadows, and she wasn't going to let the next woman suffer the same way she had. She began working with a national organization to create a scholarship program aimed at helping women who had been financially manipulated or controlled. The program would help them gain financial independence, learn how to protect their assets, and rebuild their lives. The first donation came from a woman she had met through the program, someone who had found the courage to leave her own abusive relationship. Ava smiled when she saw the check. It was a reminder that what she had started, what she had fought for, was making a real difference. But there was one more step in her journey: Emily. Her daughter had taken the first step toward healing, but now, Ava wanted to help her take the next one. Together, they would build a future free from the shadows of their past. One quiet evening, as they sat together on the porch, Emily looked over at her mother, her voice soft but certain. "I'm ready, Mom. I'm ready to move forward. I'm ready for the future." Ava squeezed her daughter's hand, the bond between them stronger than it had ever been. "And so am I." Together, they were unstoppable. As Ava watched the sunset with Emily by her side, she realized that everything they had been through had brought them to this moment. A moment of peace, of possibility. The future was bright, and it was theirs to create. And for the first time, Ava felt completely at home in her own life, knowing that the fight for her family, for her future, had only just begun. Ava sat at her desk, the sun shining through the large windows, casting long shadows across the room. Her office, once an afterthought in the quiet of her home, had become a sanctuary of sorts, a place where the ideas she had spent years nurturing finally had a home. The foundation she had built, and the legacy she was creating, had all started with a single step forward, and now it was growing into something that felt too big to hold. But Ava wasn't afraid. Not anymore. Her eyes scanned the list of women she had mentored over the past year, each one a testament to the power of resilience and the courage to rebuild. The foundation she had created was dedicated to providing financial independence and education to women who had suffered from financial abuse, much like she had. It was her way of ensuring that no woman would ever have to feel trapped again. She had started small, but as the months passed, her reach grew. More women joined the cause, finding strength in her story, in the truth she had shared with the world. Her mission was clear: to teach women how to regain control of their finances, to rebuild their self-worth, and to stand tall in the face of adversity. Ava had become a champion of financial freedom, her message resonating across the country. She had even been invited to speak at conferences and workshops around the world, her name becoming synonymous with strength, empowerment, and survival. Each time she spoke, she was met with a crowd eager to hear her story, eager to find hope in the darkness they had lived in. And every time, she walked away with the knowledge that she was making a difference, that her voice was changing lives. But as Ava's influence grew, so did the work. She wasn't just advocating for women. She was building something that would last. She knew that her time wasn't infinite, and that legacy, her legacy, had to be secured for the future. It wasn't just about the work she was doing now. It was about making sure it continued long after she was gone. That was why, on this bright morning, she was reviewing her estate plan. Ava's pen moved across the page, the weight of the decision settling on her like a quiet certainty. She was securing her legacy in a way that would protect Emily and the foundation she had created. Her wealth, everything she had fought for, would go to the cause, to future generations, and to Emily. No one would be able to take it from them again. She wasn't just protecting her daughter's inheritance, she was safeguarding the work that had become her life's mission. Emily had changed too. It wasn't just that she had found peace after years of healing, it was that she had found purpose. Ava couldn't have been more proud of her. She had taken her own experience, her own suffering, and transformed it into something that could help others avoid the traps David had set for her. She had started a career in finance, using her education and newfound strength to help other women manage their money, to keep them from falling into the same traps she had. "It's not just about the money," Emily had said to her once, as they sat in the kitchen, the morning light streaming through the window. "It's about knowing you have control. It's about feeling safe." Emily was a rising star in the finance world, and Ava knew that she would continue the work they had started together. As she looked at her daughter, Ava could see the woman she had become, a woman who was no longer afraid, no longer trapped. Emily was building her own future, one step at a time, and Ava was determined to help her every step of the way. But now, Emily had something more to offer than just her experience. She was ready to take on a key role in the foundation, to help lead the charge, to continue the work her mother had begun. Together, they would build a future where financial freedom wasn't just a dream, it was a reality. The first time Ava stepped onto a stage in another country, speaking at an international conference on financial independence and abuse recovery, she could hardly believe it. Her voice, her story was being heard around the world. The applause, the appreciation, it all felt like a distant memory, like something she had only dreamed of in the darkest moments of her past. But here she was, standing before thousands of people, knowing that her words were making a difference. And when the foundation received its first large donation from a corporate sponsor, Ava knew that they had created something bigger than herself. The scholarship program she had launched, aimed at providing financial education and resources to women starting over, was beginning to grow. More women were reaching out for help, and more people were becoming aware of the issue. It wasn't just about financial independence, it was about freedom. But even as her success grew, Ava knew there was still much work to do. She couldn't rest. Not yet. There were still so many women who needed help, still so many lives that needed to be rebuilt. As she sat with Emily that evening, looking out over the quiet garden, Ava felt a deep sense of peace. They had come so far. Emily had built her life back, and Ava had found hers in the process. Now, together, they would continue to create a legacy, not just for themselves, but for generations to come. "Mom," Emily said, her voice breaking the quiet, "you've done something amazing, and I'm so proud of you." Ava reached over and took her daughter's hand. "We've done it together, Emily, and we'll keep doing it, for as long as we can." Together, they were unstoppable. The foundation continued to thrive, reaching more women each year. Ava's story, her courage, and her dedication had become a beacon of hope. And as the years passed, her legacy grew, not just in the work she had done, but in the lives she had changed. For the first time in years, Ava could look to the future with hope, knowing that the fight for financial freedom, for women's independence, had only just begun. Ava stood by the window, the soft evening light spilling across the floor of her new home. It was a home that symbolized more than just bricks and mortar. It was a symbol of everything she had fought for, everything she had rebuilt. It was the safe haven she had longed for in the darkest of times, and now, standing in it, surrounded by the quiet hum of peace, she felt the weight of her journey settle into a deep, knowing calm. Her eyes wandered over the familiar yet new surroundings. The walls, once bare, were now adorned with photographs of Emily's graduation, moments of their journey together, and pictures of women who had been touched by the foundation they had built. Each picture, each memory, felt like a thread woven into the fabric of her life, and as Ava took it all in, she couldn't help but reflect on how far she had come. It had all started so simply, a decision to protect her daughter, to find out the truth, to face the dark reality of betrayal. But she had never imagined it would take her this far. What began as a fight against David's manipulation had transformed into a mission of empowerment, not just for Emily, but for women everywhere who were still trapped in the suffocating grip of financial and emotional abuse. The pain, the fear, the doubt, they had all been a part of the journey. But with each battle, each victory, Ava had emerged stronger, more determined. And now, she stood here, a woman who had reclaimed her life and her power. A woman who had not only freed herself, but had set out to free others. Ava's eyes closed for a moment as she took a deep breath. It was hard to reconcile the woman she had been, the woman who had once been terrified of speaking out, of standing up against the man she loved, with the woman she had become. The woman who had stood in front of millions, who had used her voice to inspire change, to raise awareness, and to create a future where women could thrive without fear. But she had done it. Against all odds, she had done it. And now, the future stretched out before her like a vast open landscape. Ava wasn't afraid anymore. She had faced the darkness, and it had no power over her. She had let go of the weight of David's lies, of his control, of the shadows that had once consumed her. She turned and glanced at the clock. Emily was due home soon, and Ava couldn't wait to share this moment with her. Their bond had been tested, but it had only grown stronger. Together, they had built something beautiful, a future filled with hope, with promise, and with a deep understanding of what it meant to be free. When Emily stepped through the door, Ava couldn't help but smile. The years had brought so many changes, but the one constant had been their love for each other, their unwavering support. Emily, once so lost, so vulnerable, now walked with a quiet confidence. It was a beautiful thing to witness. "Hey, Mom," Emily greeted her with a warm smile, setting down her bag. "Everything good?" Ava walked over to her, taking her hand, her heart swelling with pride. "Everything's perfect. I was just thinking about everything we've been through, and about how far we've come." Emily met her gaze, her eyes reflecting the same sense of peace that Ava felt. "We've made it, haven't we?" she said, her voice soft but full of strength. "I don't even recognize the person I was before, and I couldn't have done it without you." Ava's chest tightened with emotion. "And I couldn't have done it without you." They stood there for a long moment, the weight of the past and the promise of the future hanging in the air between them. They were free. Finally, truly free. Later that evening, as the last light of the day faded and the stars began to appear in the sky, Ava and Emily sat together on the porch, side by side, just as they had in the quiet moments of their lives before everything had changed. But now, the silence was different. It was filled with understanding, with peace. Ava thought back to the early days when everything felt uncertain, when every decision had been a leap into the unknown. The journey had been long, and the road had been hard. But now, sitting next to her daughter, she felt the full weight of everything she had fought for, and she realized that it had all been worth it. "I used to be so afraid," Ava said softly, her voice breaking the stillness of the night. "Afraid of what might happen, afraid of losing everything. But now I see it wasn't just about survival. It was about reclaiming our future." Emily squeezed her hand, her voice steady. "We've done it. Together." Ava smiled, looking out at the stars, a quiet sense of contentment settling over her. The past no longer held the power to control her, and the future was hers to shape. She had faced the storm, and now, in its aftermath, she had found something even more valuable: peace. For the first time in years, Ava felt the weight of her past, of the pain, the fear, and the loss, lift from her shoulders. She had done it. She had found herself again, stronger, freer, and more alive than ever. As the night grew deeper, Ava stood and looked out over the quiet landscape, the future unfolding in front of her. The work was far from over, but she knew, deep in her bones, that she had created something that would last. Not just for herself, or for Emily, but for every woman who had ever felt trapped, controlled, or invisible. She turned back to Emily, who was standing beside her now, looking at the same horizon. "Ready for the next chapter?" Ava asked, her voice filled with quiet confidence. Emily nodded, her eyes shining with determination. "Together, Mom. Always together." Ava smiled, taking her daughter's hand once more. They stepped forward, side by side, into the future they had fought for. Stronger, freer, and ready for whatever came next. As Ava looked back one last time at the life she had built, the lives she had touched, and the battles she had won, she knew this was just the beginning. I pretended to travel, and in doing so, I uncovered the truth. But in the end, I found myself stronger, free, and ready for what comes next.